All right. Welcome, everybody, to session 42 of Classic Metal Class. And this is taking up a topic that Scott and I kind of hit on a little while back. And it's something that I think we've touched on a number of times in different ways. And we could call it ethos or character. And it's quite important for bands and musicians. I think especially in a genre like heavy metal, but it's a concept that's been around for a very long time in philosophy and rhetoric and communication, and it does benefit from getting some kind of rigorous focus. And so we're going to try to do some of that here, but it's also something that in outline or a less well worked out sense, every one of us, before we started studying philosophy or rhetoric or anything, we all related to it. You know, back when we were kids and we'd see something going on with a band and we'd be like, that doesn't seem to match what they're projecting. That's a disconnect or a discordance in ethos or character. And we have a whole bunch of terms for that we've used, like when we call somebody a poser, for example, right? We're saying there's something going on here. They're projecting something that isn't true. And it really does apply to heavy metal bands and musicians. And so what we're going to focus on here particularly is the let's call it disconnect or discordance. But you know, it's an interesting larger topic. How do bands actually project this sort of thing? And it's often perceived and judged as negative. If you've got a mismatch between the ethos that you're projecting and how it actually turns out that you live your life and relate to people, we often are like, see, they're a hypocrite, they're fake. But in some cases, it might actually not be negative and even get perceived as positive. And so we're going to look at some of those cases as well. So what have I left out, Scott, in terms of like this topic and why we wanted to pick it up?
I don't think you've left anything out. I mean, it's really kind of exploring what's presented to us and if it matters or not. You know, like you could take an ironic band like Gore, right? And say, well, you're in it because it's funny, it's ironic, it's hysterical. You don't expect that these are real people. I think looking at bands, heavy metal bands, since it's kind of a genre we've always said that's for the underdogs or the kind of, you know, lonelier people in high school. If you really relate to them and it's not what they said, it could be a really big letdown in some cases. So I think it's a really important topic, especially in heavy metal, where, you know, we've kind of talked about a certain type of person generally seems to be a metalhead.
Yeah, that's something we're definitely going to delve into. The like, I'm one of you, or
Right.
you could be where I am. What would you call it? Idea, and I care about you. I mean, we've joked about this before in the past. A band shows up and they have to like look down at their notes and they're like, "Hello, Milwaukee, you know, home of Miller beer," and you're like, "Yeah, they don't know even where they are." It's a good thing they got some crib notes here. They
Right.
lose something by doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you being there is so convinced, and how excited you get. Like, one of the ones that I always liked, they would always name a major road. Like, we were coming down 495, and you know, like, you know, one of the big roads that you would identify with. You're like, yes, they're in our state. They're, you know, they know something about us, or, you know, when maybe they just asked, what's one of the major highways around here.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting observation by Ken. I think there's a distinction to be drawn between bands who have a marketing persona that may not represent reality and a band who seek to sincerely present them as one thing, but where that presentation is false or dishonest. Yeah. And I mean, once you're doing marketing, especially if it's based on like market research and focus groups or stuff like that. I think you've left the value of authenticity pretty far behind, right? Although I did see something before we jump into what ethos is. I did see something really interesting in a documentary about glam metal and like the Sunset Strip and all that recently, which was that Rat, particularly Stephen Percy, and I think the rest of the bandmates went along with this. He had a very interesting line of reasoning. He's looking around at all these other metal bands, like say, Motley Crue or some of the other ones in LA and the whole, Southern California area. And he's going to all these shows and he's like, it's mostly dudes here. If we want to sell more records and we want the place packed, we needed about 50-50 men and women. How are we going to do that? We're not going to actually change the music, which, to their credit, Rat did. They're a glam band, but they're also like a greasy, gritty, band as well. Nobody can accuse them of wimping out. But they chose deliberately to be kind of fashion plates, Motley Crue kind of tried to pull that off with Theater of Pain, but it didn't really work. They looked weird. But Rat, it worked. And women would show up to these things and they'd be like, yeah, we want to see these attractive guys, and the fact that they play guitar and sing, that's sort of a nice bonus as well. But now,
Yeah.
you could call that marketing, right? I mean, on the whole band's part, but especially the singer who's the brainchild behind this. But they made it work. They made it part of their ethos, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh boy.
Oh,
You want to read these, Scott?
yeah, this is great. When Metallica came to South Africa in 2006, one of the opening acts was Good Charlotte. The guitarist came out shouting, "Hello, South America." He may have been drunk. That's great. That's very possible.
Oh yeah.
I saw Carcass. Oh yeah, in a small venue in Fort Collins, Colorado. Jeff said, "It an hour to be the city named after the former lead singer of Genesis." Gotcha. Oh my God.
There's probably like a website out there with band mistakes or stuff like that.
And Collins isn't Collins.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew's got a question for you, Scott. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. Have you experienced moments where audiences or peers expected you to behave more metal than warranted based on appearance? Would resisting these stereotypical expectations, in your opinion, be betrayal or relief? I do get that, even in a rock sense, not in a metal sense. I am told, because I usually dress up, but I'm kind of expected to dress up really rock and roll. But what that means is kind of what we looked at in the past, where the bands would wear clothes that you couldn't go out and buy. I have to find some rock and roll making company, and then you have to use a wireless because you have to go around the stage and you have to kind of rock out. It's actually interesting, the show I just did last week, it was that way, but I was the only one that was asked to do that because I was the guitarist. Would resisting it be betrayal? In my case, I don't know, because I don't know if the audience expects me personally to do that. But if I was let's say that I was asked to pick it up in a band, and the crowd expects this from you. If I were to resist it for my own ego, I guess the crowd might feel betrayed, if that's what you mean.
Well, that was actually one of the cases we were going to look at much later on. And we've talked about this one before, when Fast Eddie Clark, left Motorhead in kind of a huff over Lemmy wanting to do too many collaborations with women. They brought Brian Robertson of Thin Lizzy in, and Thin Lizzy did not look like a wimpy band by any means. You know, they're kind of metal adjacent. You look at old promotion pictures of them, they look like tough guys.
Yeah.
But apparently Brian Robertson would come out and he just did not match the look. He wore biking shorts and tops and stuff like that. And then he played his great stuff, but people were like, "What the hell is this?" Because you got Phil, filthy animal on the drums, drumming away, looking, actually smelling terrible. Apparently, when fans would blow out, into the audience, people would be like, "What the hell is that smell?" Because he didn't bathe much. And then you got Lemmy, looking the way he always did, and then you got this weirdo playing guitar. Like, what the hell, right? And it ended up like driving ticket sales down to the point where the band got in some financial trouble. And afterwards they were like, first of all, Robertson, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
We got to get some new guitarists, and they got to actually like look like rock and rollers, and we're gonna have to rebuild. And it did take them, from there to Orgasmatron and rock and roll. They had to like win their fans back because of that.
Now that's an interesting story, because if I were to be brought into Motorhead, nobody would have to ask me to match the look.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bring my own look because it's not my band, first of all. And I'm kind of surprised that if he showed up to the first rehearsal, because Lemmy kind of always dressed like that, if he was hanging out, went out to clubs or whatever, that's what you got. But so that's kind of interesting that, yeah, I mean, I remember when Damn Yankees with Tommy Shaw from Styx, when they were wearing bicycle shorts and stuff, it was just like, oh, what's this crap, like, it was an early 90s thing, and I never got it. But yeah, that's an interesting one, that you join a band and you don't visually fit in. That, in that case, on that level, I think that is a betrayal to the fans.
Yeah. And it's an interesting one because it's Motorhead who gets blamed, not just Brian Robertson.
That's right.
In that case. So yeah. Well, let's talk about what we mean by ethos. And it means character in Greek. It's actually, so there's ethos, which is habit, and then ēthos. So I'm kind of mispronouncing it, but we're gonna mispronounce it anyway. And it gets referenced a lot before Aristotle, but Aristotle is sort of the granddaddy of like sustained discussion of it, because he talks about it in a number of different works. One of them is the Nicomachean Ethics, and then another one is the Rhetoric, and then the Poetics. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And one reason why philosophers like to focus on it is that it plays a big role in moral and communicative and dramatic life and context for non-philosophical people. So philosophers started paying attention to it because it was important, and important for everyday life. And so, the theories we could think of as tools that are there to help us make sense out of something that we already know on a basic level, but get confused about. And so, in heavy metal, we might say somebody's really a rock and roller, that they're the real deal, that they're truly metal, whatever metal happens to mean. I think that's kind of an equivocal term. But we also say that person's fake, they don't live up to what we, expected of them. I used the word poser earlier. That was a very common term back in the 80s, I think. And we'd even use it for like different kinds of metal. If you're into thrash, you probably looked at glam as not being real metal, even though MTV was playing lots and lots of it.
Right.
And how do we get our head around this? Well, I think lyrics are a big part. What a band sings about. Sometimes they're when Judas Priest sings The Sentinel, we don't really expect that Rob Halford is coming out with a bunch of throwing knives. I mean, he could. That would be kind of an interesting stage act, right? But he's telling a dramatic story. and it's one that we get into. Or, Iron Maiden's The Trooper, right? The Eddie
Right.
comes out on stage and it's dressed it's got a flag and stuff like that, but nobody's shooting it or anything. It's not doing the charge of the Light Brigade. But so lyrics play a role. I think we get a lot out of interviews, and
Yes.
the idea was with the rock and roll magazines that you would get a behind the scenes look at what these people who we only saw up on stage or on album covers were really like, stories that get told about them, their lifestyle. We might also view it in terms of the music itself. Like, the music is hard and heavy and abrasive. And so, if a band comes out, well, for example, we've talked about this before, when a band that is really fast and distorted turns its attention to power ballads, sometimes we're like, oh, what's that? What's going on there? Are you getting soft? Selling out, as we sometimes say. And it's not just a matter of just one thing. So you can't like build ethos with, I don't know, a single album cover or a single interview. It's something that takes place over time, but you can lose it in one action or engagement. And I think, those of us who are older probably remember how Billy Squier essentially shot himself in the foot doing a music video where he was dancing around. A lot of people use the word prancing in a pink outfit for Rock Me Tonight. And before that, I mean, he was touring with like Rat and, people like that. And that ruined his ethos more than anything else. People were like, yeah, this guy's, I don't know about him. And, sales went down. Now, Ken says might be somewhat genre dependent. A black metal band would be in trouble if they didn't wear spikes and chains, but nobody cares when Maiden wears stripy lycra pants. Yeah. So a lot of this is, I think you're right. A lot of this is genre dependent. And can we say that people signify their allegiance to a genre or a style by how it is that they wear and how they talk and stuff like that? Like, if a black metal guy comes out and he's like, yeah, I go to mass every Sunday, and I like to say the liturgy of the hours because it's really important to get nice and close to God, not the pagan gods, but the God of Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. We'd be like, well, what's going on there? Are you white metal now or something
Right.
like that? Whereas I don't know if I don't know, Blackie Lawless had a religious conversion and became a born again Christian, as did Dave Mustaine. And nobody's like, oh, well, you went the Christian route. It's all garbage now, so.
Yeah, I think in like Dave Mustaine's case, for example, the music, and he generally has kind of a bad attitude, and
Yeah.
he's and I think he still has all that. And Megadeth has diehard followers, and him short of starting to do power ballads or something to that degree, I don't think the religion thing had anything to do with Megadeth. So I can see why that didn't really turn people off.
Yeah, so like the power ballad thing is interesting because Megadeth has a Tout Le Monde, right?
Yeah.
And it's a softy sound. I think if you've built up enough ethos, you can get away with more, right?
Yeah,
whereas if you're
true.
Inconsistent, maybe people are like, yeah, I guess they are going that way. For Megadeth, it could be a single departure where people are like, yeah, I don't know about this, man. And then you get right back to the stuff. Or like Lemmy's, I forget the name of the song. It's about, he's not a nice guy. I think he did that with Ozzy as well.
Oh, okay.
And it's on an acoustic. There's stuff that comes in. It's arguably a ballad. But he can get away with it because he's got 1,000 other songs that aren't.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, if it became a habit, if he had an album of ballads. That yeah, unless it was looked at ironically. I don't know, but like I think Motorhead is one of those diehard, the diehard fans, and they earn that through, in his interviews. And there's all these videos of him talking. When he reads, you ever see the ones where he reads the letters to him?
Yeah,
yeah, and and he's a smart guy. I mean, and he would respond to letters and stuff. It's like, well, that's Lemmy. We believe him. That's his personality. He's rough around the edges. He's, the music's amazing. His bass is distorted.
Jumping ahead. So when we get to talking about Aristotle, he talks about how you project ethos in terms of rhetoric. And he says that there's three things that are absolutely essential for a speaker to have if they're going to be taken seriously. One of them is they actually have to know what they're talking about. Another is that they have to have some level of what he's calling virtue, arete, but I think it's being used in a broader sense there, not to mean like they're the moral paragon, but they're a decent person. And then he talks about eunoia, which means like goodwill. So this is the thing that often gets lost. You realize that somebody knows what they're talking about, they're a decent person, but they don't care about you. They're not interested in you as a person. And you're like, okay, I get that they're an expert, but they don't move me. But Plato in the Gorgias was talking about three things that are very similar. And he used a different word, which is very, very common in Greek culture, called parrhesia, that we often translate as freedom of speech, but it's a better translation is frankness of speech, being a straight shooter, telling people what you really think. And, Lemmy in his interviews is like that. And the stuff that he says doesn't always like perfectly coordinate because he, like the rest of us, he's not a person free of contradictions, but he's not going to lie to you. He's not going to bullshit you, right? The way some people might. And so his ethos is quite consistent. Dio was like that as well.
Yeah. And then you take, I don't know if you ever saw the interview where it's Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, and they're obviously in a fight at this point. And the interviewer will ask, so what's the most important thing? You partiers, and Gene Simmons would be like, yeah, it's the ladies, it's the women. And Paul Stanley's like, it's about the music. It's just about the music for us. And, and then he's like, well, what's the weirdest thing you ever got on tour? You received on a tour. And Gene Simmons is like a baby, and Paul Stanley goes, alleged baby. All right. and Gene stops the interview and says, can you stop undermining me?
Interesting.
You stop undermining me. You're making me look bad. And Paul's like, yeah. But it was this whole thing about they had completely different answers for what was important to them. And I just saw that as kind of a Paul Stanley being a straight shooter because he doesn't drink and party.
Yeah.
But and they were both into women, but I think, Paul wasn't going to put up with Gene's,
portrayal of himself.
Yeah, right. And I saw that as kind of like a band ununited in their ethos.
There was that famous interview, and I don't remember who it was with, where the whole band is being interviewed, the original lineup, and Peter, Chris, and Ace, and I think Ace is high at the time. I mean, good chance he was because spent a good portion of his life that way. And they're like bullshitting around, and Paul and Gene are at first uncomfortable and then getting pissed because they view Kiss as a business.
That's right.
As something that, that's not just for having fun and stuff like that and being a rock star. You got to like make sure you project the right sort of image, which does include partying and, the persona of the demon and the star. Peter Chris is like just off the rails, just saying random stuff. And then Ace is like laughing maniacally at it. And you could tell like something's going to happen with this band. This can't go on like that.
I think that was the Michael Douglas show. Was it?
Was it? Okay.
It was Ace was just laughing, and it's like, what would you be if you weren't in a guitarist? And he said, I don't know, a plumber.
Oh,
and,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was just joking around and making these jokes, and you can see the camera. They're like Paul and Gene are visibly angry.
Yeah.
They're kind of like trying to force a laugh or a smile for the camera. But I remember thinking, wow, that's which is the side the fans are more attracted to at the time.
Yeah.
In the 70s, I mean,
I know who it would have been for me. It was always like, Ace all the way.
Of course, but yeah, I mean, the time that Gene went on, they said, we want somebody to go on the show, and he went there and he didn't speak. He just stuck his tongue out and acted like a demon. And that's more like what Gene would want to happen than joking around.
That's actually a good lead into something that we touched on a little bit. So when we're talking about this whole ethos thing, we're not talking about like totally imaginary stuff. So you brought up Guar, great example. Does anybody actually think that they were space aliens, that just happened to come and play heavy metal? If you do, you're I think so far out there, you're not really part of the conversation. So if you get to go backstage and they take off their, prostheses and you're like, holy shit, you betrayed me, you're really off base. And I think we could say that there's a lot of that in heavy metal. You think about the songs and the stuff that they're supposed to be about. If you buy into some of these things too much, especially with like the video stuff, you could kind of go off the rails a bit. So there's that. And then I think another thing that we got to be careful with are cases where the band is not responsible for the image that is being promoted or projected. Other people are. And a classic example of this is Black Sabbath being associated with Satanism when, Geezer Butler he still is, a good Catholic boy, and they wear crosses and stuff like that. And you think about like the song Black Sabbath, it's not about, oh, let's worship the devil. That would be so awesome. It's like, oh crap, I ran into the devil and this is awful. So, but it's interesting. You sing about the occult and call yourself Black Sabbath, and then, you've got this image. So if you depart from that, are you breaking your ethos? I don't think so. And I'd be curious to see what other people think about this. If you've played on the ethos to like make money, maybe now, yeah, people can expect that. But if you're not really responsible for the ethos, or, another great example, Ozzy Osbourne in the famous or infamous Bat episode, he was so drugged out of his mind. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. He's lucky he was able to like sing and stuff. And, after that, he's the crazy guy who bites the heads off of bats, and, everyone goes to a concert expecting that sort of thing to happen.
Right.
Was he really responsible for that? I suppose if he's like, yes, when I get interviewed, I am the Batman,
Right.
But I don't think you could say he really did that. It was more, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about other things instead. So I don't know. What do people think about this? It's a mismatch of ethos, but it's not their fault.
Yeah. So in other words, of course we saw this in the 80s where parents said, this is what they mean, or this is what they're about. And the band didn't say that. I think the band's pretty safe as far as continuing on as they were. Short of, like you said, them owning up to it because they think it'll make record sales. Now they're involved in it. Now it's not parents talking about it in the case of all that in the 80s, although it wasn't just metal bands they were after, but same idea.
Yeah. Another one where it's kind of sad in that way, where they didn't have any control over it, is Winger. Who, because of Beavis and Butthead, and I forget the name of their friend. Well, he wasn't really a friend. They bullied him. Who, one Stewart. Of them Stewart, yeah. So one has an AC/DC shirt, the other has a Metallica shirt. Those are like considered legitimate bands, and then they associate Winger with this little blonde kid who's a wannabe. And after those episodes started airing, Winger, like their career just like went downhill because people were like, yeah, they're probably not cool at all. They probably aren't real metal. They suck, and
It,
totally out of their control. They at first they were like, what the hell happened? People aren't
right.
coming to the shows. So
It's kind of ridiculous too, because if you look at it, the two dumbest kids in the world are wearing AC/DC Metallica shirts. It's like, but yeah, that did have an effect. And of course, that happened in the early '90s when that kind of style was out anyway, so that didn't help.
yeah. So Ken says, I think many or possibly most fans are prepared to accept all sorts of personalities or even behavior as long as it comes across as being authentic. Yeah. So that's a really important proviso there. If it doesn't come across as being authentic, if it seems forced or faked, like they use the wrong words or something,
Right.
that's not going to work. You think about the Steve Buscemi meme where he's got his like rock band t-shirt and his hat on and the skateboard, and he's like, hello, fellow kids. That's not going to work. But yeah, if something does come across as authentic, at least for the fans, they'll be good with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Mark brings up another term. Could this be something to think of in terms of doxa as reputation, where the opinions others have of you are at odds with your ethos? Yeah. And doxa, interestingly, so it means like your reputation that you have, but it also means opinion. So, your reputation is a matter of other people and how they view you. And it is, very often it can be managed, right? Or promoted, but you don't have that much control over it because other people, for whatever, grounds they have, decide that sort of thing. If we look at, I don't know, like Twisted Sister, right? You look at Dee Snider, who was a gym rat and kind of a tough guy. But he's wearing, he's got the blonde hair and he's wearing pink and all this crazy makeup. If you were like, that guy's a fruit, which I think some people, were willing to say, um, that could, if that stuck, it would ruin his reputation. Now, the fact that the band would like get in fights with people and that he was like a big buff guy,
Yeah.
and the songs are all about tough guy stuff, right?
Yeah. Rebellion.
Yeah. Well, and think about like being under the blade and stuff like
Right.
that, right? That one, by the way, I think was on the PRMC's what did they call it? The Naughty 15?
Yeah. Right. It was on the list.
Yeah. Turns out apparently it was about an operation. So yeah, Mark or Rob says, ask Socrates. There's a great classic example. In the apology, Socrates explains how he wound up becoming, if we're going to steal Scott Gorham's famous catchphrase, the man with a bad reputation. So yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about Aristotle. So there's really three ways ethos gets used, and I think all of them are applicable to the kind of stuff we're talking about here in metal. So in the Nicomachean Ethics, your ethos or your ethos is a matter of your vices and virtues. So we use these terms even today. We talk about people being courageous as opposed to being cowardly, or just as opposed to being greedy. Big thing, I think, for bands. Self-controlled as opposed to being like self-indulgent. Having good temper as opposed to being a grudge holder, and truthful about themselves as opposed to being boastful. And I kind of think it's an interesting thing to bring up because some of these, like being fair, probably really important for musicians and bands, because if you get a reputation as being a greedy bastard, people don't want to work for you. And, you know, if you're like sidelining people so you can get more of the share of, you know, honor or something, you're a jerk. And courage is looked at as important as well. But we think about the party lifestyle. You know, if you're being self-controlled, you might be viewed as being kind of a stick in the mud. You're
Right.
not cool like the other people who indulge, you know. Or you know, think about anger. So not being motivated, not being in the grips of anger, I think for some, at least certain genres of metal, and including like, you know, straight middle of the road, um, you know, what we call traditional heavy metal, anger is often viewed as like a good thing, and not being angry is viewed as being a wimp.
Mhm.
So, you know, I don't think the heavy metal ethos is, well, ethe and Aristotle neatly align on these sorts of things. And then in the rhetoric, we talked about this already. Aristotle talks about, you know, what goes into ethos. He also says of the three main modes of persuasion. So you got logos, which is argument or, you know, structured discourse, and you can pay attention to that. And then you also have pathos, which is emotion, which could be another great topic for us to talk about sometime, emotion in metal. Ethos, he says, is the most persuasive of these. So portraying a consistent character, that's pretty important. And then in the poetics, he's talking about, um, you know, largely tragedy, but also other kinds of, you know, dramatic performances and all of that. And he says that ethos is a really important thing in that. If you have a composition that doesn't portray character, it's going to fall flat. Plot is really important. So the storytelling, right?
Mhm.
Muthos, the way people explain their ideas, what he calls thought or dianoia is important. Music is even important in tragedy, as is spectacle. But ethos is really, really central for that. And I think we can look at, you know, what goes on in heavy metal as something like dramatic performances. A song isn't just, you know, la la la, isn't this beautiful, you know, let's listen to the music for its own sake. It's, you know, think about Wasp's Wild Child, right?
Mm.
It's there's a certain eroticism to it. It's also got the rebellion thing. The music supports that. It is
Yeah.
portraying a kind of character. You know, then contrast that to stuff off of the Headless Children, where you know, they took a very different turn. They're no longer looking the same. Things are kind of stripped down. It's much more political. That's ethos. So I think, you know, what Aristotle has to say can be helpful for fleshing this out, you know, and thinking about what goes into an album or a set list, you know.
Yeah. Well, set list, that's a good one.
Mm.
Um, you know, because you know, metal audiences, I mean, if you just think, I mean, I don't know, Iron Maiden comes to mind. I mean, when they go overseas or they go, people, you know, are a lot rowdier and they'll sing along to every lyric really loudly. I don't know if you
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
got Rock in Rio. It's like the audience is almost louder than the band in that if you listen to it. So, um, but yeah, I think and even album order, the order that they put the songs in. You know,
Oh yeah.
what do you leave them off with at the end, or what do you start them with? You know, because back then we would put the needle on the record and listen to the whole thing. So it was much more important. I guess maybe still if people listen to the albums that way, but I don't know that they
I
do.
don't think a lot of people do these days.
Yeah,
You know, it's interesting you bring that up. So yeah, you're right. We would listen to the whole side of an album, and then as soon as like cassette tapes became very big, you could buy cassette tapes of an album, but it was better to actually have the album and then record it onto a 45-minute cassette because you could
that's
pack the
right.
whole album on it and you didn't have to flip anything. And then you could put another album on the other side, you know. So like I had Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil on one side and Rats Out of the Cellar on another.
Nice.
And I actually had one of those boom boxes where it would, after it finished, it would like play the other side of the tape.
I
And
had one of
so,
those too.
you'd pick stuff that like went together that way, or, I had Iron Maiden's Peace of Mind and Number of the Beast on, flip sides. So yeah, actually Ken says Doctor comes first, Iron Maiden comes last. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of bands that have like picked out like here's the intro music, and so Iron Maiden, yeah, Doctor, Judas Priest likes to start out with War Pigs. I'm trying to think of who else we've seen in concert where that's what they do every time.
Right.
But let's go back to this discussion that Andrew started here, because I think that's going to lead into our next topic. Well, so Andrew says, why do metal bands with obviously fake or exaggerated characters like Gwar, and we can think about like Steel Panther as well, a parody band,
Sure.
you know, or Spinal Tap for that matter, right? Often last longer and avoid backlash, while bands that seem sincere or real are judged much more harshly when fans' expectations no longer match what the band does. So if Kurt Cobain talks incoherently in an interview, fans may see it as troubling or disappointing, or a sign the real person behind the music is falling apart. But if the lead singer of Gwar starts talking about radioactive penguins, no one is concerned, because that behavior fits the exaggerated character the band has always presented. Yeah, I think if you're clearly, something in the realm of the imaginary, you get a pass, right? Because people are into that.
Or they're
Um,
not emotionally involved in the parody bands. They're emotionally involved in the other, like Nirvana. People were very emotionally involved with that. This guy understands me,
yeah,
and you're going to be kind of sensitive to it, and you'll tend to defend the band more too. I mean that's another Aristotle thing about anger, is if you're really a big Iron Maiden fan and you love everything about them, and somebody makes fun of that band, you're going to get angry.
yeah.
Whereas somebody can make a joke about Gore, and I don't know if you're going to get really angry. You don't have that kind of emotional connection with the band.
Yeah,
Same with
I
Steel
mean,
Panther. I mean, you could say, they're just fun, but they're not speaking to you, say like Kurt Cobain.
with the Kurt Cobain thing, though, I think that, at least from where I sat in the 90s, seeing him kind of ramble incoherently didn't seem out of character
Right.
for the songs that we were seeing on, Bleach and Nevermind, and then finally In Utero,
Yeah.
I was actually thinking of like, the people who listen to Insane Clown Posse and really get into it and identify as juggalos, do they believe these guys, for example, don't know how magnets work? There's that famous song where they're like, how do magnets work? Nobody knows. Then people are like, no, people do know. And they're like, they're miracles. I think that actually the song is called Miracles. If you see an interview with them where they're like, no, if we take the paint off, we're really a bunch of smart guys who don't really believe any of this stuff, and we don't like Fago, by the way, and that would really jar people, I think, right? But it is Insane Clown Posse effectively like a parody band, or are they do they represent like an authentic ethos of sorts? I mean, I think if you asked a bunch of juggalos from Detroit, they might say, yeah, man, this is the lifestyle.
That's interesting because they had all those short movies that they made that were supposed to be like horror movies, but very comical. I mean, they were like, you would laugh through the whole thing. They were funny.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think with those short movies, they were kind of making fun of the whole thing, or they were showing that they weren't so serious. But yeah, it was definitely I never had a problem with them. I just never became a big fan of theirs, so I wouldn't know what their fans are like.
Yeah. So Rob says there's probably another distinction: pretending or acting where everyone knows you are pretending and is in
Yes.
on it. So Gore would be like that. and then pretending acting, but pretending you're not pretending. So I guess like the metal band that pretends to be like super into the occult, and they're like, when we're off stage, we drink the blood of sacrifice, and then you find out, no, they actually just go to the bar and they don't even drink beer. They just have like seltzer water or something like that.
Right.
Right. Yeah. There's a disconnect, right? Now Andrew says, Insane Clown Posse, we have a concept Dark Carnival, which leads to Shangri-La. Each album is a different gesture, something like that. And Mark says, my understanding is that juggalos have a reputation for being really friendly, which is part of the ethos of the community. And that's actually an interesting thing. We talk about, so like Kiss has the Kiss Army, right?
Right.
And that was existing when we were kids. And you could get like a card that you could put in your wallet and all of that. A lot of bands have their own, what do you want to call them? Like communities that they've created, like Raven has Raven Lunatics. And that became kind of like, you could get like a t-shirt when you help do the fundraiser that helped to produce the Extermination album back in the mid 2000s. So, I think you can talk about an ethos to a community as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I don't with the Insane Clown Posse, I'm kind of naive to that whole.
Yeah, me too.
I wouldn't be a good person to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I did think the films were pretty funny, and the short, whatever they were, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't a fan of their music, but like their whole image was kind of comical and funny and everything. So, I can talk about the band a little bit, but I can't talk about their music, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, before we jump into like more lower level stuff, kind of a high level thing that some people have already brought up. At least for heavy metal artists, maybe for other genres of music, this doesn't matter so much. There's, I think, two values that we can identify as being sort of like meta values that are really important. One of them is consistency and the other one's authenticity. And these aren't exactly the same things. So authenticity means like being true, like we talked about, being, saying what's actually on your mind, not being fake, usually like the rest of society that's a bunch of phonies and stuff like that. I think that's really core to metal, not just metal. I mean, punk really incorporated that as well. And the things that matter to you, you should place those first. So if it is partying, well, you should party a lot. If it is Satanism, well, be the best Satanist you possibly can. If it's like being a tough guy or being a loner, well, then stick with those sorts of things. And do that because that's really what you're going through, not just because it's what's expected of you or your whole crowd is doing it. So like giving in to peer pressure to do drugs would not be metal, right?
Right.
Doing drugs because you love doing drugs, or doing drugs because you want to escape from this crappy 9-to-5 existence that you got, that could be metal, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So authenticity is really important. And I think that's part of what gets lost,
Mm.
when a band changes things. But consistency itself is really important. So, when you're changing, because artists are going to change, right? Every human being hopefully gets a little smarter as they get older and do some dumb stuff and think about it, and maybe don't do quite so much dumb stuff the next time around. But musically, bands are going to change too. And part of it will be, they want to grow as artists, and part is like new technology becomes available. So, bands might be viewed as like selling out, and that's a loss or a lack of consistency. So when a band, changes direction radically, so Sabotage, great example. The Hall of the Mountain King, great power metal, stuff they're doing later on. Not really my cup of tea. They thought that was, the way they wanted to go. And I was like, this ain't even really the same band, even though it's got a lot of the same people. I think a lot of us have had experiences like that where, when Van Halen fired David Lee Roth and brought on Sammy Hagar, they changed
Yeah.
significantly, and a lot of people didn't like that. Or they liked it, but they were like, it's not as good as
Right.
the explosive mixture it had been. Another one I was thinking about was, in the mid 80s, Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. And Iron Maiden had said, no synthesizers or ulterior motives. Was that on Peace of Mind?
Peace of Mind, I think.
Okay, so 2 albums later, they're using guitar synths. And people are
Yeah.
like, what the F is this?
Yeah.
And I actually really liked Somewhere in Time.
Me too.
Um, I
Yeah.
wasn't as big of a fan of Turbo at the time, but now looking back at it, I'm like, yeah, actually a lot of that was pretty good.
Yeah. And I think those songs translated live,
Yeah,
like
that's
Turbo
true.
Lover, like they didn't have the keyboard parts in it, and they didn't have the that pre-chorus like machine gun kind of thing. They didn't have any of that. And actually it's a killer rock song. It's like
When you hear it live, you're hearing it with the full bass and drums, which you might not be getting through like your car stereo or something like that.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought those sometimes songs translate better live than they do from the recorded album for whatever reason.
Yeah. This is a side note, they include Turbo Lover in their set lists, and I think Out in the Cold makes it in as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's a good one live,
Okay. Yeah.
So, but they probably lost some fans doing that.
Right.
But they were able to recover because they had a significant body of work behind them. If a band doesn't have that sort of consistency, I don't know. I think it's tougher for them.
Yeah. If they don't, I mean, I think Priest is an example, and Maiden, of they have diehard followers, and
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
and they might be disappointed at the albums, but I don't know. I hear people talk about, say, Turbo, and I think what they say is that was a tough time to be a Priest fan, but they didn't abandon them altogether.
Yeah.
They didn't throw away their albums. And I think you're right. I think if a band did okay with 2 albums and then changed, and the fans they had, they didn't have such a longevity. They didn't have so many albums that were, I don't want to say one thing, but like filled one idea of what the band was, and then change it radically. That
Yeah.
could, I mean, like you said, there could be, it depends on who you are. There could be one thing that ends or harms your career.
It's interesting to think about. Like you're right. There are people who are what we could call diehard fans. Like if you ask them, who's your favorite band? They're like Iron Maiden, right? And I
Right.
was like one of those when I was younger. Iron Maiden was my absolute favorite band. I did like a lot of other metal bands, but if I had to like, only one of them can live, well, Iron Maiden. You don't even have to ask me. And anything they did, I wanted to hear, Um, and I don't think that that's the case for a lot of other bands. There's a lot of bands where people are like, yeah, they're good. I like them. I'd go see them. But if their catalog disappeared tomorrow, I don't think my life would be significantly worse off, so Ken says, I'll happily admit to being one of D. Snyder's fanatics when it comes to Maiden. Yeah. Maiden had that sort of fan base, right? And so having
Yeah.
that, maybe it makes it easier for you. I think that's part of what made it tough for Motley Crue when earlier on in their career, like you mentioned, Scott, 2 albums, right? 2 really great albums. Their
Yeah.
debut and then Shout at the Devil, and you see the pictures of them and you're like, this is a metal band, right?
Yeah.
And then Theater of Pain comes out and you're like, and you look at the images of them in Hit Parader and Circus, and they're dressed up like pimps. And you're like, what the hell happened to these guys?
I know.
And of course, like they became more popular in part because they were able to like breach that uh, female fan barrier, right?
Right.
But a lot of us were like, I don't like this crap. And it took a while to like earn that trust back.
It did. I remember being disappointed when that album came out. Um, and I remember being in a band and we played Home Sweet Home at the dance because it was such a popular song. Our band had a gig playing the dance. And I remember being so mad. I'm like, there's so many Motley Crue songs we could play. Why are we playing this one? Well, because the girls like it, And
Yeah.
so they definitely picked up more fans, but as we would call as metalheads, the wrong kind of fans. We're the diehards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they recovered. But I think something with them, the whole, I think they got in a lot of trouble recently. First of all,
Oh,
Vince Neil's just not so great live, but
yeah.
the using tracks and then the using of AI for their new album really kind of got them
I
to.
hadn't heard about that for lyrics or.
I don't know if it was some of the album or it was written with AI or the pre-production
Oh,
was done with AI. Um,
interesting.
and that album kind of like went straight to video, as we would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point about the performances. So it's with a singer, your shelf life is kind of limited. Drummers too. I mean, the fact that Nickel McBrain retired so late, you're like, holy crap, that
Right.
guy is doing something athletic, and I'm surprised he lasted that long. A lot of singers have trouble. Don Dokken can't really
He
effectively
can't
sing
sing at
anymore.
all.
And it's understandable. Even Ronnie James Dio, you listen to the performances of songs like in the last 10 years of his life, and they're pitched down like a couple keys. He's not able to hit the same highs, and he was still very powerful, but he
Yeah,
didn't
he
have
was.
the
Yeah,
range.
his phrasing and everything was phenomenal. I mean,
Yes.
it didn't bother me that keys changed. I just thought it's Dio,
Yeah.
and everything about Dio. How he was a straight shooter. You
Yep.
know, and it would be hard to. I think he had a fantastic run with no real glitches. Even when he got away with using keyboards because he's Dio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rainbow
Yeah.
uh, keyboards were essential to it. Were there keyboard parts in those two Black Sabbath albums, Heaven and Hell and the Mob Rules,
Oh,
or was
no,
it
I
all
think
just?
Sacred Heart.
Well, I mean, from Holy Diver on, I mean,
Yeah.
the keyboards are important. Claude Schnell doesn't get credit until I think last in line, but he's there and he's an important presence. But where I
Yeah.
was going with this is so like with using tracks, it's one thing if like you're a singer and you can't sing anymore, kind of understandable. Um, if you're a bassist and you can't play your bass parts and you're up there effectively playing air bass,
Yes.
pretending to do it like Nikki Sixx is, that's that's pretty low.
It's a big
And
letdown.
yeah, I mean, it would be one thing if so like Steve Harris would never do that. But if
No.
Steve Harris did have to do that, I think
Oh,
we'd cut him some slack because we'd be like, well, he can't do everything that a Steve Harris did. But if you can't play Nikki Sixx bass lines, what the hell's wrong? I mean, that's like first, second year kind of stuff. You
yeah.
aspire to be able to play like Steve Harris or to play Yes stuff, with Chris Squire or whoever,
Right.
right? Nobody's like, oh man, Nikki Sixx, he is my bass idol. I gotta learn to play like this guy. And now Nikki Sixx can't play Nikki Sixx, which
Yeah. That was so shocking. I don't like tracks with vocalists. I'd rather them change the melody a little and change the
oh,
key. You know, instead of hitting the high note, they changed the melody a little bit on that part. I would
Yeah.
rather that than the tracks, because at least we're hearing them as they are today, which is how it should be presented, because 1986 is over. You know, if you didn't see him in the heyday, you didn't see him in the heyday.
Yeah.
Um,
True.
so that's just my, you know, I don't like tracks in general. That's just my, I know some people think they're fine, and that's okay. But I get disappointed if I go to a show and you know, somebody's faking it,
Yeah.
you know.
Now, Ken brings up an interesting point. It helped Priest that they went from things like Point of Entry and Turbo to producing Painkiller, which a lot of fans regarded as being like a return to form. You know, and even like Point of Entry, I get that people were like, ah, this is a departure. It wasn't as much of a departure from what they were doing before, the way that Turbo was from, you know, Defenders of the Faith and Screaming for Vengeance were just before that.
Right.
It was like, you know, this is like a real right turn. But yeah, it points out a good thing. So if you can produce a Painkiller after that, people are like, okay, back to square one, and they got a new drummer who's actually really good. Motorhead, you know, after I mean, I actually think Another Perfect Day is one of their best albums. But, you know, if I had been watching them on tour, I would have been like, who is this weirdo, you know, dancing around with his guitar? Orgasmatron's a great album. That's a great comeback album. I mean, who else misstepped and then came out with another great album that put them back on track, you know?
You know, I don't know if there was a misstep, but I remember, and I don't know how you felt before Brave New World came out and we heard a new Maiden album was going to come out with Adrian Smith. I didn't have high hopes because we went through
Okay.
the 90s,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, I love Fear of the Dark. That's a great song. There were some good songs, but overall I think they went to playing clubs, and they weren't as big, and I mean, they didn't have the Bruce Dickinson, but when that album was going to come out, I didn't have high hopes for it, and it turned out to be a really great album. Uh,
Yeah.
and really brought him back. And you know, bands don't always come back with a great album. I don't know if it's fair for me to say they just kind of phoned it in, or you know, but that one I thought was a solid album of great tunes.
Yeah. I mean, that could be another interesting thing to follow up with is like trajectories of
Yeah.
albums, right?
Well, you know, when we did the class on new albums from classic artists,
Oh, right, right.
I was pretty surprised at some of them were really great, you know.
Yeah.
Some of them were really solid albums, and then I was wondering, well, why isn't this doing better? You know, why isn't this getting them more attention?
Oh,
You know, but
yeah.
it's the promotion, it's the money behind it. We know that, but you
Well, and
know,
it's the landscape too. I mean, it's very tough to break in as an older band producing new
yeah,
stuff on something like Spotify, right?
right. But
Um,
pretty solid efforts, you know, and um, but yeah, I didn't expect that album. I remember hearing it was coming out, and there was a big promo about it. I'm like, it's probably not going to be that good, you know.
yeah,
And we you know, because the '90s Iron Maiden was tough. That was a tough time. I during the '90s I listened to the old albums, pretty much. I don't think I
yeah.
own like X Factor and all those. I never owned those albums. Um, but yeah, then I started buying them again when Brave New World came out. So I guess maybe you could say that that was their kind of comeback, that they did a really good job.
Ken says, as has been said, the 90s were a tough time to be a Maiden fan. Yeah. Yeah, for a couple different factors,
Yeah,
right?
Ken.
But that would be one of them is you're not as happy. I mean, actually, another band that now comes to mind, Kiss, right? They've had some real missteps. Music from the Elder. People are
Yeah,
like, what the hell is this crap, right?
yeah.
Um, there are some stuff from the Unmasked era that I think kind of didn't get as much play as it deserves, like Hot in the Shade. That album is great, I think.
I love
But
that album.
you don't hear people talking about it. They talk about, other things. Yeah, Ken says Blaze was and is a good and professional singer, but he isn't Bruce.
Yeah, I give Blaze a lot of credit. A lot of credit. It's not that he wasn't great. He is. It's just it wasn't like you say. If you're not Bruce, and it's funny because Bruce took
Yeah,
over, and there was question whether he was going to be accepted, but then they came out with Number of the Beast, and that was just such a great record. But yeah, it's kind of Bruce is kind of the guy over all these years. He's one of the non-replaceable ones, I think, and that proved it.
yeah. I mean, the same thing with Judas Priest, right? You
True.
can have somebody other than Halford, but it just is not going to work quite as well. Whereas you can replace the guitarists, you know.
Yeah.
Andy Sleep can do KK Down or not KK Glenn Tipton stuff, and Richie Faulkner has been doing KK Downing stuff for years, and he's awesome at it.
He's a great player. Yeah,
Maybe
they're
even
both.
better than KK, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Um, you know, so some people are more replaceable than others, I guess.
Yeah, Halford, he's it's just like anytime I've seen Priest, it's like I'm rooting for him because he's so awesome, and it's just he's got this thing about him that you love. I love how he talks to the crowd. I love how
Yeah.
it's just so and he just gets you psyched up. I love the old rants.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew says, I always like when a singer is interviewed and comes across as intelligent. They gain a virtue from people. Manson is one who comes to mind. He's always articulate in interviews, and people latch on to that to have intelligence by proxy. Same thing with Bruce Dickinson when people find out he's a pilot. Perhaps there's an ethos retrofit. Phil Anselmo's Nazi salute destroyed his credibility. Was that an incident authentic at Anselmo or a performance? That's a great question. I mean, if it was performance, man, that was a really dumb one, you know?
Yeah.
He really, I guess, misjudged how it would be taken. I always took it as being authentic. But yeah, it's hard to say with that sort of thing. I mean, it's funny too, because like bringing up Lemmy again, he gets a pass for wearing like World War II Nazi memorabilia, you know, but it's in part because he portrays something contrary to that, you know. And I think, you know, once you get to be a Lemmy or a Dio, you could get away with more stuff, you know. But yeah, the being intelligent, you know, when you interview somebody and they don't have intelligent answers, it's not like you're like, well, I'm not going to listen to them anymore because, you know, I don't want music made by dumb people, because it could still be quite good,
Right.
but you're disappointed, you know.
Well, you always go back to like Kevin DuBrow,
Oh,
which was the exact opposite, and actually harmful, because it was just kind of like,
yeah,
I'm the best. These other bands aren't good. They're not, I'm I'm their influence. There's some people that just kind of want controversy, but I do agree about when a singer is intelligent, and
yeah,
especially if they're singing about any kind of topics that take any thought, it would be a disappointment if they didn't come off as intelligent in an interview.
yeah. It's interesting with Kevin DuBrow that you used the first person singular, because I think, you know, what he was doing on stage in an interview is he was saying, we, Quiet Riot, were the like original LA rockers and all these other bands. And that's clearly false, because Van Halen was, you know,
Right.
the rival at the time. All these other bands owe their success to us. But I think behind it was
Right.
it's not, you know, Rudy Sarzo or Kelly, what was his name? The bassist before him who DuBrow actually got like in a fight with, or Randy Rhoads, or Carlos Cavazo, or Frankie Banali. It's really me, Kevin DuBrow, who speaks for them using the name Quiet Riot. And it came across, going back to the Aristotle thing, as being very boastful.
Yes.
And being motivated by kind of a bitterness. People got really turned off by that.
And you never heard Rudy Sarzo talk like that in interviews, or
I don't think any of the
those,
other band members
no,
ever did.
no, definitely not.
Oh, so Mark brings up there are a few rock stars who have this image of being radical and against the status quo. And then at some point, the facade breaks and you realize they're just conservative a-holes. Anselmo is one. Glenn Danzig is another. Now they just come across like grumpy old men or that weird uncle. Yeah, I've mentioned before, I went to a concert with Andy, and it was one that was delayed by COVID, and it was Rage Against the Machine. And you want to pick a band that is like their ethos has been, we're anti-racism, we're anti-capitalism, and they project all these things up on the screen. And they could not have given a crap about the audience one bit, because the only thing that any of them said as they were on stage for the entire show was the singer looked out and he saw like the crowd at Alpine Valley, which is huge because the grass seats, people occupy it. And he said, "Holy shit." And then they just started playing, and he didn't say a single word to the audience at all. And, now does that mean that he wouldn't have, bona fides as being, I don't know, against the status quo and all that? Not directly, but the fact that he had the opportunity to connect with this massive crowd of people and just like, I don't know, show like a little solidarity or something, that he wasn't, more important than everybody else. I mean, with the guitarist Tom Morello, you can forgive him because he's doing his weird wiki shit on his guitar, right? And you'd be like, okay, he's doing what he's here for. But a singer has got to actually engage the audience, unless it's some sort of weird performance art, which nobody said it was,
I like what Mark says.
Oh, go ahead.
I like what Mark says, a man for the people as long as he's not with them.
Yeah. Well, and they're all like millionaires too. So, that when you're singing the songs of, they became what we used to call Neiman Marxists, the rich Marxists who preach the message, but yeah, they don't invite you to their parties.
Right.
So
I've never heard that's a good one. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's disappointing. That would be really off-putting for me. Especially with the nature of the music.
Yeah.
To rile the crowd up, you could even do that,
Yeah, and they had Run the Jewels opening for them, and Run the Jewels is just two guys, and they were totally engaged with the crowd. And I think a lot of the people weren't there to see them; they were there to see Rage Against the Machine,
right?
But they knocked it out of the park, So Andrew says, with non-fungible singers, ones who can't be replaced, in metal, where front stage performance carries heavy symbolic meaning, how much responsibility does a frontman have to prevent private life signals from destabilizing the shared character of the band? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because sometimes bands get pissed at their frontmen, right? Does a morally incentive act, probably some sort of bad act, make the music itself unlistenable for people despite being unchallenged? Ian Watkins from the band Lost Prophets, convicted of sexual assault on minors. Gary Glitter, whose music is no longer neutral. I actually saw a call, because I guess one of Gary Glitter's songs still gets played at like hockey games up in Canada, and people were like, we really shouldn't be playing this stuff anymore, given who the guy is. I think, in some cases, so here's like a 2-for-1, right? Ted Nugent, hard conservative, just says crazy crap, but he also was kind of gross with minors. He was like, I'm not into drugs, I'm into women, but he wasn't into women, he was into girls.
Oh my God.
And now, does that mean that you shouldn't like listen to Cat Scratch Fever or Stranglehold? it's a tough one because those are some great songs. But it's always a little tainted knowing that sort of thing. In other cases, you know, if it's not like somebody who's so central to the band, well, one of Judas Priest's drummers got in trouble for something to do with child stuff
Oh
years
boy.
and years and years ago. I don't remember which one it was, but he got in deep trouble. So, but you're not like, well, I'm not listening to Judas Priest anymore because it's the drummer, right? But if we found out that Rob Halford had actually been, behind the
Right.
scenes doing nefarious stuff, or Lemmy, or pick whoever else, that's pretty tough. Or Dio, for that matter, right?
You're right about that. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. If it's one of the key people, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Ken says, can an artist, individual, or a band and their material be separated? I think for some people, they're like, yeah, of course. There's extremes. There's people who are like, nope, the artist is the material. There's no separation between them. And then there's another extreme who's like, I just like listening to the music, man. I don't care about, what they're like. And then there's the rest of us in that uncomfortable middle where we're like, well, I think we got to decide this kind of case by case. And I
Yeah.
don't know about this, finding out that, I'm blanking on his name from Pentagram. The only guy, Bobby Liebling, was actually convicted of elder abuse.
Oh my
That
God.
makes me less willing to listen to them, I'll admit, you know. Um, but you know,
Yeah. I mean,
that's a
it's
tough
stuff
one.
like that. I don't know if I told my Todd Rundgren story.
I don't
Um,
know.
see, I've always been a big fan. He's not metal, but I went to see him a few years ago, and he got really political. But the real stab in the back was when he would look at his watch and say, "It's been 45 minutes. You can't get your money back." And
Jeez.
he just kept he would do a song, but then he'd spend 20 minutes ranting about politics.
Oh,
And people were getting up and leaving, and there was this whole divide. Like, people are getting angry, calling each side out, and it was. But the fact that he kept pointing out that you're not getting your money back now; it's too late. And I'm going to say what I want to say. I I have a hard time listening to his music now.
okay.
You
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah, it's
that
like it's like having a friend who you find out is really an a-hole, right?
yeah, right. Yeah, but and I love his music so much, but I pass on listening to it now just because that was that was very deliberate. That was very kind of self-absorbed, deliberate. Um, you
I
know,
was just thinking, it's the sort of thing you'd expect from Gene Simmons,
yes, yeah, right, yeah. I mean,
And with him, you'd be like, well, this is in character.
or if it was Rage Against the Machine, even you might understand it a little bit more,
Yeah.
um, because that's what they sing about. But yeah, that's I've had times where I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of case by case. I agree. Kind of gray area in the middle. But
Yeah.
that's one that was hard. That was when you get deliberately, um, what do you call when you're deliberately putting down your audience or taunting them. Um,
You know
that
what would really be bad is if you're like, you people are so stupid
oh yeah,
for liking my stuff or trusting me or something like that. That would like be a gut punch, I think, to a lot of people. I don't even like this kind of music. I just play it to make money off of you suckers. Um,
that would be the ultimate.
yeah. Now Ken says I think we tend to form parasocial relationships with our favorite bands. And when things they do are highly contrary to our own preferences, it's naturally disappointing. Yeah, and I think there's like a range of things, right? So like there could be aesthetic matters when um when it's an artist who I really like and they're like, this, these other artists are really great and these are crap, I can be like, well, they got their views on it and I don't
Right.
agree with them. Like Steve Harris, for example. Um, you look at who he says he looked up to and who he thought were the really great bassists, and he's like, yeah, Chris Squire, and you're like, okay, I totally understand that. And then
Yeah.
he's like, Pete Way of UFO, and you're like, well, he's a good bassist. He's not remotely like you, Steve, where's this coming from? And then, the fact that he was like really into promoting Wasted,
Yeah.
WAYSTD, which was not a good band. And you're like, what the hell did he see in that? It's sort of like finding out, yeah, they like I don't know, they like movies that I'm not into. We don't really care that much about that. I mean, if we do, we're weirdos. There's something wrong with us, right? If it's on the other extreme and we're like, yeah, it turns out that their hobby is going to the Humane Society and getting a litter of kittens once a week and then going to the river and deliberately drowning them one at a time, we're like, oh, yeah, not listening to that guy anymore. That's horrible, right? And
Yeah.
then there's all sorts of stuff in between. We find out, I mean, if we find out that somebody, because they were, um, a partier back in the 80s and they beat up their girlfriend back then, but then they got into AA and they made amends, right? We're not usually like, well, once you've crossed that line, you're dead to me, right? But if we find them like in the 90s writing a song about it where they're like, yeah, and then I pushed her down the stairs, I think we'd be like, yeah, I don't think so,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
not okay. Um, oh, Mark asked with that kind of contempt for the audience, saying, "I've got your money. You can't get it back." Be an opposition to magnanimity, not taking responsibility for your status within the performer-audience
Oh,
relationship.
that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, Mark. That
it
I mean, it
is
was,
kind of the opposite of magnanimity, right? It's like saying you're little people and you
yes,
can't do a damn thing about it.
right. And not only that, he was playing a lot of like corny, like retro early 60s tunes, like, really like he was
Ooh,
yeah, he was doing like a cover thing of like really campy songs, and it seemed like the whole thing was contemptuous. And
wow,
yeah, um
petty, we'd say.
yeah, I mean, like, he was putting down people politically, with name calling. Okay, but then when you start making it personal beyond that, it's like now
Yeah,
you, first of all, being that political divides your crowd immediately.
yeah.
And then once you just draw everybody in with you're all suckers, now I can say whatever I want and I'm keeping your money. um oh, I
Here's a
see.
question. Oh, you want to read Andrew's question, Scott?
Yeah, have you ever avoided certain musical styles, imagery, or projects because they might conflict with your beliefs, even if the music itself interests you?
Hmm.
um I can say that I'm always, I want to say this carefully. I I'm not I'm not a fan of the whole tribute band thing now. Now, tribute bands are what brings in the money.
Yeah, yeah,
So you'll see a lot of clubs now book tribute bands and not original bands because, well, original bands for the most part don't bring in the audience that, say, a Deep Purple tribute band would bring in. Um, and I was offered to be the Richie Sambora in a Bon Jovi band, and I turned that right down because that definitely goes against my beliefs. Pretending to be somebody else, and it's not that I don't like Bon Jovi. I would say the same thing to a Deep Purple band. I love Deep Purple, but that goes against why I got into music in the first place, and it kind of goes against my I don't have a problem with tribute bands. I think I have a problem with the fact that they're what brings in the money, and that's what society
mm,
likes. I'm kind of mad at the society aspect, not mad at, but I'm I'm more upset about the society aspect of it, and I have no ill will towards the tribute bands. I just don't want to be part of that. So I think that's the only time I was offered something, and then otherwise it would just be a band that I didn't think that was that good. So I didn't want to commit to some dates with the band that I didn't think that was I wouldn't enjoy playing their music, and the musicians weren't that good. But that's a really good question. I haven't run into anything where they were like political and it went against my beliefs. I don't think I would join any political band, just because that's just a hot topic.
Let me actually take us a little bit off track. Do you think, Scott, and everybody else, that when it comes to like tribute bands, there would be a difference between a tribute band that it doesn't matter what they look like, they're just going to play the music of that particular band, and people don't have to like fulfill personas? And then what you were talking about, Scott, where you got a Bon Jovi tribute band and you're supposed to resemble Richie Sambora in some way, or a Deep Purple band, and you're supposed to resemble, I'm guessing, not, Tommy Bolin, because he was only with them for a little while. But, Richie Blackmore, right? So like scowl on stage and stuff like that. So are those two pretty different from each other? Like some, you can't possibly be the thing. Think about the Iron Maidens. So each one of the players, the singer is doing Bruce Dickinson, the bassist is doing Steve Harris, but you don't expect a bunch of women to look like Steve Harris and Bruce Dickinson. They obviously don't,
Right.
But where you're supposed to look like or resemble, you're supposed to portray.
Right.
Is there a big difference between that then?
You mean as far as joining it, or as far as just looking at the bands?
Either one, I would say.
I mean, the ones that just play the covers of the band, I mean, I guess the ones that are going to do better will portray, like there's a bunch of AC/DC tribute bands, and you have to have an Angus Young.
That's true.
So
in those, do they like do they wearing the little schoolboy outfit and stuff?
Yeah, I've seen some of them before, and you have to have they it's almost like they get into character. Early on, before tribute bands were a huge thing, I saw Physical Graffiti, which was a Led Zeppelin band, when I was in college, and it was scary. They were so close. They looked like the movie Song Remains the Same.
Okay.
And they had the exact same outfits, the exact same gear, and they had the moves down. And I remember going, well, this is kind of cool, but I mean, who got into music to like emulate somebody else so much?
Yeah.
Like you buy the gear, you find and buy the gear, and then you get the clothes, and then you practice the moves. I don't know. It goes against why I got into anything artistic.
Now, let me take it into a slightly different direction with one band that might prove an exception to that. What about Kiss tribute bands, where you're putting on the makeup?
Yep.
And you are going to be Gene or Ace or Peter. I mean, it's probably you're not going to do like Vinnie Vincent, the Fox, or something like that. You're going to be one of the original four. It's obviously a performance. You don't have to like pretend to be Richie Blackmore, but if you were going to be Ace Frehley, you'd have to put on the mask, or not the mask, the makeup.
Yeah.
And then, you play his solos and, kind of try to imitate his tone and stuff like that. Would that be as objectionable to you as like being pretending to be Richie Blackmore?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cause I have to put in the hours,
Okay.
I'd rather put in the hours writing or put in the hours on self-practice rather than putting the hours to be Ace Frehley. And, I guess those bands make really good money, but I never, I never understood becoming an expert on that person and the way they played. And, to the point where, you have to practice the phrasing, the steps, and to act like Ace Frehley on stage. That's kind of difficult. He was very stiff with the whole outfit and everything, and yeah, it would be the same to me.
Yeah.
Except the makeup would be a big pain. Yeah, to do that every night.
Oh yeah. So Mark has a related question. Will you guys go watch the holographic AI recreations of classic bands when they start rolling out their concerts? Would these be a kind of tribute band, and would a band's ethos be wiped away in such a scenario? So three different questions. I mean, I don't anticipate going to watch any holographic stuff myself, because I mean, what would be the attraction? There, I mean, there's bands I didn't get to see in their heyday that I would have loved to have seen, but it's that subjunctive would have loved,
Yeah.
not still want to see. So like I never got to see Dio live. I'm not going to go and see a hologram of Dio, even if it's not a crappy one like they tried to put out a couple of years ago. Like, let's say it's really, really good. I just don't see why I would go see that. Because it's not Dio,
Right.
I mean, Kiss recently came out with some stuff like that, and people were like, well, this is laughable. I don't want to see this crap. What about you, Scott? Would you?
Yeah. Well, part of being in the crowd is, interacting with Dio,
Yeah.
And I mean, you might as well. I don't know. I have no interest in going to see the AI like hologram because it's not Dio. It's not. You're not part of an experience. The music's going to be exactly as it would be in any city. Everything. Everything's going to be identical. And you're not part of a moment. You're not part of what makes a live show a live show.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, the second question, would these be a kind of tribute band? I don't think so. A tribute band at least is like following the groove and trying to imitate, it's mimesis, whereas AI reproduce stuff, it's not really imitation in the same sense. I mean, this is something that would take a lot of like thinking through what exactly is the difference there, but it doesn't strike me as the same sort of thing as a tribute band.
it is in a way that it's not Dio. It has nothing to do with Dio. It's an image that looks like Dio.
Here's a little wrinkle to it that might be halfway through. When Kiss shows up in Scooby Doo, not voiced by the actual members of Kiss, but turned into cartoons. Is that a tribute band? I don't think so.
No, but it's also not a show. It's not
Yeah.
like a show you're going to see. You're not buying tickets and parking your car in the garage and walking to your seats. And
Well, the Scooby Doo people did.
wait,
There was an episode where it's like one of those crossover things, and I think if I remember right, because like when my kids were little, they'd watch Scooby Doo all the time, and I think they actually go to a concert in one of the episodes. But of course, you're right; it's a show; it's not a real concert. It's sort of like talking about a picture of a picture on the wall, and it's hanging by a pictured nail. It's not it's all still just a picture, right?
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, appearing in an episode and it's not really them. That's not a concert. But well, Andrew says, for me, the character on display in tribute bands is referential as it points elsewhere. The guitarist does not need to embody the stance, history, or risks associated with the original band. They need to approximate the technique, tone, posture, visual. Yeah, which is a lot of work because the audience is not invested emotion that's some of the bands that really do it well. I see the crowd getting emotionally involved, almost like they believe they're watching the real band. It's really strange. Some of these bands that try to do it really exact.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You don't have, you really don't have the same ethos. You don't, because you're not the person. Like I
Yeah.
wouldn't be Ace Frehley. I'd be putting on a show to make people believe they're watching Kiss to some degree.
I got emotionally involved in watching the Iron Maidens, but not because I thought they were Iron Maiden. It was because of the Iron Maiden songs moved me emotionally because I've been
Yes.
listening to them since I was a kid, and because I don't know if I can articulate this well. There was a sense that these women up on stage loved Iron Maiden and their music so much that they thought it was worthwhile for them to learn these things almost perfectly,
Yeah.
these virtuoso performances, practice together, and then come and share it with us. So you're reacting to two things. There's the original stuff that you're reacting to, which you could be getting, just listening to it in your headphones or something like that, listening to, Phantom of the Opera one more time. And then there's the being there experience of it with people who are so much better. I mean, I learned to play a few Iron Maiden songs on the bass when I was, 20 years back playing a lot of bass. I didn't play them perfectly or anything. That bassist who they had, and I forget her name, she
Yeah.
was amazing, and that singer, singing Bruce Dickinson stuff, man, that's, and the,
Yeah.
the opening band was Paradise Kitty. Okay, singing Guns N' Roses stuff, that's cool. It's not
Right.
Iron Maiden cool.
And
So,
and the drummer is the drummer from that band Phantom Blue,
right,
the
yeah,
metal band from
she's
the.
been in it for like 20 years.
Yeah. And I actually met her because I have a couple I have students that have been in and out of that band, but she was really nice. It was pretty cool to meet her just because I knew the band Phantom Blue, like I knew of them
Yeah,
back in the day, and she was really nice person. Really cool. All of them were really cool, which is, which is good.
yeah.
That'd be off-putting if they were egotistical.
Well, in that respect, they also do reflect the characters of the people in Iron Maiden. You know, you if you were to meet with the Paradise Kitty people, who obviously they don't resemble Axl Rose or
Right.
Slash or anything like that. But if the Axl Rose person was really nice, you might be like, that's not Axl Rose's echo. He's kind of an a-hole, kind of selfish and self-absorbed and thinks he's better than everybody else, even though in many
Right.
respects he isn't. So you're not adequately getting it across.
No, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it all wrong.
Yeah. Um, Ken says something interesting. An AI or holographic impression does not involve any sincere effort or skill
Yeah.
on the part of a human performer. It's an automated reproduction, no matter how good it might be. Yeah, I think that's right.
That's said better than I said it. Yeah, because it's going to be the same thing no matter what the audience does. If the audience is tame or if the audience is on fire, it's not going to do anything to the AI performance. Um, and Andrew says, you just reminded me, Scott, of an Aerosmith tribute band fan. He followed them all over the UK to the point that Steve Tyler was a bit concerned for the guy. No kidding.
That would be weird.
That is weird. And I know people like that follow the tribute bands around. They're at all the shows.
I mean, would that be so? This guy, the Steve Tyler being referenced there was not the real Steve Tyler, right?
Right.
It's okay. I get it. Yeah, I thought maybe the tribute band guy was following the actual band Aerosmith around to like hone his
Oh,
performance, which would be kind of a weird thing to do, but maybe somebody would have. I mean, it costs you so much money to do that. That wouldn't be a very good way to go about anything. But
the interesting thing is there's some tribute bands in this area that actually have meet and greets.
really,
Yeah, I mean, shocked me.
do they sign the stuff with the person who they're portraying's name
That's
or their own name?
probably their own name
Okay.
because, but I'm trying to think. I have no problem with them doing it. But I do get concerned about people that pay for it.
Yeah,
Because, but you figure you could put anything out there, and if nobody wants it, nobody wants it. But if so you put, it sounds ridiculous for the band to do that, but if they're making a lot of extra money doing it, I feel bad for the people that are doing it because like they're paying for it. You want your
yeah, I
picture
guess
of somebody that's
in a way they're kind of hard up for engagement, right? I mean, I could imagine somebody who like loved Ronnie James Dio or Lemmy so much that they were really affected by their loss. I mean, both of them have been gone for more than 10 years now,
yeah,
and there's like a hole in their heart that no matter how much of their stuff they listen to, it just never gets filled, and they go to see a tribute band and they're like, this guy looks just like Lemmy. If I could just interact with him for a bit, it would be kind of like the real deal. But we
interesting.
look at that, we'd be like, wow, what an extreme case.
Right.
Ken says, I can understand tribute acts holding meet and greets if their intrinsic fame and ability results in their own authentic reputation. Um,
hmm.
yeah, like they're the best Judas Priest tribute band out of all of the many ones out there.
or,
Um,
or do you mean the like with intrinsic fame that they're known for other things as well? Maybe
oh, okay.
like for example, um, if a kind of famous guitarist joined a Kiss tribute band or something, a local
Yeah,
famous
yeah.
kind of thing. It could be that too, where it's like their whole, known for their own skill and material.
Okay.
That I can see. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you'd be going to meet them not based off of the tribute band, but the something else that they do, which makes sense.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Well, we've kind of gone far afield. There was one other topic that we wanted to talk about that I brought up at the very beginning. What if we find that a band or musician has a discordant ethos, but they've actually gone from something that we would normally consider bad, or we would have kind of a, well, that's metal, like they're partiers, but then they decide to get sober. Have they lost their ethos
Oh,
because of that? So you brought up Kiss and Gene and Paul not being partiers. I mean, the other two I think did enough for the
yeah.
two for the whole band. But discovering that artists who portray themselves as like being about partying all night and sleeping all day actually don't do that. Is that a bad thing? And I think for some people, they're like, yeah, man, I love to party, and these guys have let me down. But I think a lot of us, especially as we get more mature, we're like, well, I don't know about that.
I mean, the classic one is, the whole rant to cold gin. You know, these people like vodka and orange juice. We like cold gin.
Yeah.
But you don't drink.
So
uh,
Ken says Halford has done many interviews describing his own path to sobriety, and I don't think he can be accused of lacking authenticity or being contrary to his own image. Yeah,
that's so true.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't like Halford because he drank. Um, that wasn't one of the things. It was, he's just bigger than life. You know,
The sexuality thing, though. Um,
yeah.
you know, I mean, it's kind of funny because you listen to the song "Raw Deal," where it's about being at Fire Island, and I mean, I remember like listening to that when I was a teenager, and I didn't know anything about it, but I was wondering why is the guy, why is the person that he's talking about in the song a guy? I thought these people were all into girls. but it just kind of like stayed in the back of my mind. And when I found out later that Rob Halford was, coming out and all of that, it was not a huge surprise. And I gather it wasn't a huge surprise to his bandmates either.
Yeah, I mean, they may have known all along.
Yeah, I mean, it really threw a lot of people for a loop, though. And I think, one of the funniest stories, and I think I've told this in one of our things before, we were going to see Priest in Reading, Pennsylvania, and Reading's a pretty rundown town, definitely what we call the Rust Belt. And so we're in a hotel, and we catch a taxi to get to the downtown arena where we're going to see them, along with Thin Lizzy and Black Label Society, in a place where basically there's the seats that you're sitting in are those folding chairs and stuff like that.
Right.
So they play a great set, but the taxi driver who's taking us there, he's like, "So what are you folks doing downtown?" And we're like, "Well, we're going to see a concert." And he's like, "Oh man, who's playing? I love music." And we're like, "Thin Lizzy, Black Label Society, and Judas Priest." And he's like, "Judas Priest? Oh man, that's the best queer metal band around." And he said it in the kind of tone of voice where you're like, well, this guy does not like queers. However, in this case, he'll make an exception, and it was like heartfelt, and it was really quite interesting. But I think there were probably some people who are like, well, you can't really be metal, but there were a lot of other people who were, well, I guess it's okay to be gay and be metal, So, if you've got a sufficient ethos, you can take people along. Lemmy's another great example, he slept around a lot, but apparently he actually was pretty good to the people that he slept with. He's got some songs that might seem pretty misogynistic and, like Jailbait, but he was somebody who went out of his way to stick up for women artists and made sure that they got their due and their place. And there's stories about him that have come out since he died, where people are like, yeah, I mean, here's what he did and we didn't know about it. And the stories are almost always like, here's what he did, and it turns out that he was a better guy than we knew. Do you look at that and be like, oh, well, see, he was a big teddy bear, he's lost his tough guy ethos? I don't think so.
No, that says something, that he wasn't loud and proud about the good stuff he was doing. He wasn't boastful about it.
Right.
He just kind of did it. He's just seeing him speak and when he would respond to the letters sent to him, he seemed like a straight shooter and good guy. And he came off as he was, like, kind of, he looked like a tough guy. He had the where's he from? His accent's really rough.
Yeah.
I forget
Ken
where
can tell us.
Ken can tell us where he was from, but he had a rough accent. And so he embodied that when he spoke, but he was a straight shooter, kind of in the way Dio was.
Yeah. Actually, somebody who you brought up before we got going, David Lee Roth, I mean, he was a screw up.
Yeah.
But, he becomes a EMT and did a lot of, looks like a lot of good stuff. So he's, was that always there in him, or did he change his life? Did he lose his ethos by becoming less of a showman type? I don't think so.
Yeah, his whole front was just, I don't know. It had a big heaviness about ego, for sure. And I remember even seeing him years ago when he did the Sam and Dave tour, the Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth, and he would just talk crap about David Lee Roth. He would just talk crap about Sammy Hagar the whole show. They're on the road together, and he would say,
that's cool. Yeah.
Sammy works for me, but I'm sure, Sammy knew he was kidding or whether they probably got along. I don't know. But unless it was just a total money grab. But yeah, and I remember being shocked when he subbed for Howard Stern that he was actually kind of a thoughtful guy. Like he would take on these topics and discuss them, and he was a bright guy, and the total opposite of what he showed himself as, uh, for his career. So that was
Yeah.
that. I remember being shocked at that.
So Ken brings up Lemmy was from Stoke-on-Trent, an old industrial town, and his dad was a chaplain in the RAF during the war. So yeah,
Wow,
that's quite interesting.
Stuck on
Um,
Trent. I wonder where that's near.
I think as we're getting close to the end of
Yeah,
our time, sometimes when people's ethos is changing, it's because they've matured, so we could talk about sobriety as a way of like figuring out I can't drink every drink in the world like I thought I could when I was a teenager or 20 something, or in the case of other artists, I can't do all the coke or the amphetamine
right,
or even Lemmy, who still like drank. He cut back towards the end of his life also with cigarettes.
right.
um and there's that aspect, the partying aspect, but the aggressivity, the I'm a loner. I think people after a while come to realize, well, that's you know Iron Maiden can't all be running free. At a certain point, there has to be something that involves a solidarity, friendship, having other people, so.
Yeah,
Well, that's interesting. Mark says, I was appreciating earlier this week how much Dio's lyrics and ethos have inspired me for a long time. Listening to you talk now, I think Lemmy's on my list too. There's a bird that visits my garden I've named after him, so that should have given it away in Halford too. Another theme that I want to pick up on in the new year, we could call it a genre of metal, but it's not actually a genre of metal. It's more like a thematic to it. And I think one of the bands that exemplifies it the best is Triumph, who by the way are out on tour again finally.
yeah. I heard.
Yeah. I don't know what to call it, but it's uplifting and it recognizes the hard stuff in life and says that doesn't have to be our focus. We can um, you know, find the magic power in the music in me. We can fight the good fight.
Mm.
I think Twisted Sister has some songs like that. I think if we look around, we find songs like that in a lot of places. And you could be like, oh, that's a cop out, man. That's not real metal. But I think there's something to it. And so sometimes that helped to carry us through things as well.
Yeah. Well, I always thought Triumph was metal because, like I used to say, they always made the back of the jean jacket. Like when you went to the mall, people would have like Black
Yeah,
Sabbath patches. But they would also have Triumph patches on it
yeah.
with all the metal bands.
Ken says it's definitely authentic and real. Denim and Leather became a concert anthem for a reason. Yeah, that's a great song about solidarity, right? And that's early in Saxon's career.
I love that album.
It's not like a retrospective, like here's what we were doing 20 years ago. We finally figured it out. They were articulating that. You compare that to like a much more aggressive, darker song that we loved as young people, Metallica's Metal Militia off Kill 'Em All, and it's
Mm.
basically we are gonna march over all you normies and do you all in. um, Denim and Leather wasn't about like we're going to kick everybody's asses. It was more of the hey, we've got our community and it sets the spirit free and stuff like that. So Ken says that metal ethos and sense of community was there right at the start. Yeah, so I think that might be a theme that we pick up sometime in the coming year.
Yeah, I want to answer Andrew's question too. When different roles you have as a musician pull you in different directions, teacher, band member,
Ooh.
collaborator, performer, do you try to stay true to yourself or do you adapt what each situation? Oh, that's a good one. Each session demand. I ask as what feels obvious to the musician often becomes non-obvious to the audience. That's interesting. And Ethos seems to live in the audience side of that gap. Um, let's see. The way I stay true to myself is I keep making my own music. That's really important for me. When I'm hired by a singer, I play the role that they want me to play. So if it's a textural role, sometimes they say just do your thing with my music, and I can kind of be myself, but I do have a set of skills that I know how to properly play over different styles of music. As far as what the style calls for. So the way I keep, if they give me the freedom to do me, I'll do it until they tell me not to. but I think it's important that I keep my own music going on, and if I didn't do that, I'd probably be like just this um never-ending sideman position I'd have, where I'd be playing the role of a so-and-so guitarist. It's like when you go into sessions, sometimes they'll say, give us a Nile Rodgers kind of guitar part, or give us the edge. We want the edge. They talk about the person they couldn't afford for the session, but they got you instead. And it's that kind of thing where or play it like rootsy, real rootsy, and then I have to be familiar with all those albums and how people played. That's a really interesting question, Andrew. Thanks. I like that one. I hope I answered it okay.
Yeah, at the risk of like taking us much longer than we need to go, I wonder, and we'll try to keep this short. So you have all these great bands, and then like while they're recording their stuff, some of the people in those bands will have their side projects that they're continuing, and I wonder if that isn't kind of similar to what you're talking about, where you're in a band and it's doing really really cool stuff, but it's not entirely what you want to do, and you need to like do your own solo projects as well,
Yeah.
which can create tension with the band, if it's a really big cohesive band. It's different for doing like studio or gig work, I think, because then
Yeah.
you're not expected to be an integral member, right? But if you're
Right.
part of Deep Purple and you want to do your own thing on the side, those guys might not be cool with that.
Right. That's true. You hear stories all the time where there's when the solo albums come out, and then years later you hear in the interviews, oh, that was a tough one because they didn't know I was doing it. Well, it's like when Barry Goodrow from Boston did his, because Tom Schultz from Boston said, we're going to take a break, so if you're going to do anything, do it now. And when Barry Goodrow was doing a solo album, Tom Schultz like insisted he produce it and be a big part of it. And I don't think I don't remember if that ended up happening on that album. Maybe it did, but yeah, it was just something. It was to be a side project, but then Tom Schultz didn't like it. Didn't like the idea of like somebody from Boston doing a solo album. And that's not the only example.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation. And I don't think we've exhausted talking about ethos.
No.
Probably we'll hit on the topic again in the future. But thanks to everybody for all of your questions and comments and prompts. And it's good to hear the questions about the musician side, prompting Scott too. So we got we'll have a whole new year of other sessions lined up that we'll put out the topics for before too long. Scott and I got to put our heads together and work through some of them, but maybe I'll put something out in the class site too with like maybe suggestions about stuff as well.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, you want to take us out, Scott?
Oh, I just thought this was a great discussion. It's one we could do for hours and hours and hours, and it's really interesting. It makes it really makes you think, and I think the conversation will stick with me for the next week as I look at my albums and stuff and kind of think about the stuff we discussed that maybe we're aware of somewhere, but it's not our main focus. So kind of reevaluating things is important, I think. So it was great. I loved it. I learned a lot too. I
Yeah,
always
me as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to sign off.
All right. Take care, everyone.